Can you tell us your full name, please?
Rickey Morgan.
What was your involvement with the Macondo Well 252 project, if any?
After the well had issues, I was called by Ronnie Fall and asked to mix up the slurry and give him my opinion of what I thought about it.
And roughly how many weeks after or days after?
Roughly 2 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks.
And what did you do?
I got the slurry sheet and I went and mixed the slurry up.
And what's on the slurry sheet?
The recipe for the slurry.
Was it a foam slurry?
Yes, sir.
How would you describe that slurry?
When I mixed it up, it looked thin to me.
And what does that mean?
It was not as viscous as I was expecting it to be.
So the thinner the slurry, the less likely that it will be stable?
Objection, Farm.
Not necessarily.
And you reported it?
No, sir.
You didn't tell it to anyone?
I didn't record it. I told it to Ronnie Fall.
Right, you told it to Ronnie. On the phone?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, did Ronnie tell you not to write it down?
No, sir.
You just chose not to?
Yes, sir.
And was that because you were concerned that it might be considered something that could be used in litigation against the company down the road?
No, sir. He was asking for my opinion, and I gave him my opinion. I didn't want to put anything on an email that could be twisted, turned, just like we were talking about earlier.
Okay. So tell me exactly what you remember telling Ronnie about the slurry being thinner than you thought it would be.
I told him that I thought the slurry was thin.
What did he say?
He said, okay, put it in an email.
Did you?
No.
You didn't want your words turned around down the road?
Exactly. Taken out of context.
Did you do this test more than once?
Yes, sir.
How many times did you do it?
Twice.
Did you get the same result?
Yes, sir.
And did you tell Ronnie, did you call Ronnie after the first test and the second test, or did you call him after both tests were done?
Both tests.
Did he tell you to run it twice, or did you decide to do it on your own?
No, sir. Tim Quirk called and asked how I conditioned the slurry.
And you told him?
Yes, sir. I didn't condition it. I just mixed it and looked at it.
Tell me about your conversation with Tim Quirk, everything you remember about it. Tim calls and says, hi Rickey, and then says what?
He said, he just straight up asked me if I conditioned, how I mixed the slurry I mixed when I talked to Ronnie about it. And he said that they had conditioned their slurry down there and asked me if I had, and I said no. So I went back in and repeated the test, conditioned it.
Now, had you been the individual that had tested the mix on the slurry before it was used, you would have pointed out to someone that, in your opinion, the slurry seemed too thin.
Objection, Farm.
The slurry may have been designed to be that particular viscosity for some reason.
When you mixed your mixability test, when you mixed that slurry,
Yes, sir.
you were using all off-the-shelf product?
Yes, sir.
Is there any reason to believe you had any of the materials that were from the specific batches that were used on the Deepwater Horizon?
No, sir.
And you didn't have access to any samples from the Macondo?
No,
project?
sir.
What conclusions did you draw about the formulation of the slurry as it related to how thin the slurry was?
I didn't know what their design parameters were, if they had tight hole, that kind of stuff. So I assumed they designed it like they wanted it.
And now when you're referring to the tight hole, that's because depending on the difference between the pore pressure and fracture gradient in the hole, you might need a thinner or thicker slurry to
Yes.
avoid losses. Is that right?
Exactly, yes, ma'am.
And did you believe, based on what you saw about the slurry that you mixed, that it would be able to foam properly?
It did foam properly, yes.
And you were able to successfully foam it?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you see any signs of gas breakout when you foamed it?
No, ma'am.
And did the slurry foam all the way up to the filled
Yes, ma'am.
container? Did you see any signs of free fluid after you foamed it?
No, ma'am.
Or any streaking?
No, ma'am.
And then even after you conditioned the slurry for 2 to 3 hours at 135, it still looked the same as the first test, is that right?
The viscosity was, yes, ma'am.
So it was still thinner than you'd expect for a foam slurry?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, did you notice any other differences after you conditioned the slurry?
No, ma'am.
And you also threw away the slurry sample?
No, I actually poured the sample into a cylinder and ran a test there.
And what test did you run for the second one?
I poured it in a 250 milliliter cylinder that is about 1.5 inches in diameter and 1 foot tall. I set it in a 134-degree water bath for 1.5 hours to 2 hours. And then I observed what the slurry looked like.
So pretty much like an API unset foam
Close to
stability
it, yeah.
test. And what did you observe about the slurry after you finished running this test for 2 hours?
I looked at the slurry to see if there was any foam breaking out, if the level of the slurry had dropped, and there wasn't. I also took a glass rod and dropped down into the slurry to see if the bottom was glass or if there had been settling of the solids in the cylinder, and there wasn't. So the slurry looked stable in that particular test.
If you had been performing the tests that you described in advance of a cement job, would you have relied on the test results you had to show that the foam slurry was stable?
Yes, ma'am, and I would have poured some samples, some stability samples.
Did you notice any settling issues?
No, sir.
And that goes for the original test as well as the repeat test?
Yes, sir.
If Mr. Quirk had reported to Mr. Fall that the test showed signs of settling, where would he have gotten that information?
Injection form.
I have no idea.
And in fact, did you, based on your test, did it seem that the slurry was in fact stable?
Yes, sir.